Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. Let's talk about Charlo's fantastic fight and performance in his victory against Brian Castano. We'll talk about the adjustment that he made from the first fight to the second, which in my humble opinion won him the fight, and the adjustment that Castano needed to make and didn't make from the first fight, and as a result it cost him the fight. I expected the fight to go exactly as it went. I expected a late stoppage from Charlo. I didn't have time to bring you guys a preview, unfortunately, but there was another fight that I also didn't have time to bring you a preview for, and that fight I was surprised by the outcome somewhat. Not massively, but somewhat, and that was Bakole beating Tony Yoka in the way that he beat him. I knew he had a chance because there's a massive error that Tony Yoka makes, a big limitation that I knew that Bakole stylistically could be able to exploit in pockets, but I didn't expect him to be so dominant so consistently. So we'll talk about that. If I was pushed, I would have said I thought Yoka probably win the fight on points, but brilliant night for Martin Bakole. So let's get cracking. Let's start off talking about Charlo, but before we do, you know how I love to come up with these experimental coffees, right? Dib and dab a little bit here and there, experiment with different flavors. Well, I've made a coffee today, right? Coffee, milk, fairly basic, right? But then with orange blossom syrup. So it's got this little floral hint to it. You know how you get like an Earl Grey tea, and it's got that bergamot and floral undertone to the tea? It's kind of like that, but a coffee version. You need to try it, right? Straight from the mind of Chris Andre, and I might have to open a coffee shop, Chris Andre Boxing's Coffee. You're all invited, and if I do, check out this mug that I made. Look at that. You ready for that mug? Chris Andre Boxing mug. Look at that there. Woo! Beautiful. Look at that. So I could serve it to you in one of these. I'm going to open it up soon. Don't worry about that. But let's talk boxing. Let's talk about Charlo. And one of the things with Charlo, the first fight, I thought that both of them had real spots of success. I thought maybe Castano just outworked him. But one of the reasons that it was such a competitive fight is that they were both tentative about each other. They were respectful of each other's weapons. You see, what Castano wanted to do was come over the top of that jab with a right hand, come in low, land a left hook and things like that. So because of that, Charlo was somewhat tentative about shooting that jab because he knew he could get countered. So he would back off, and he's got that typical Derek James type of guard, and he's very cautious in that guard. He's very protective of certain elements of his body. Very good stuff. I don't think he's as technically gifted as Errol Spence. I don't think he's as good as a fighter, but I do think he's now above Errol Spence in the pound for pound list, and I'll explain what I mean about that. And this is something that Errol Spence himself has tweeted about, by the way. Errol Spence has tweeted today to say you have to put him in the top 10 pound for pound now. Put him above me if you have to. I don't care. Right. So respect to Errol Spence for that, for looking out for his boy in that way. From ability perspective, if you judge pound for pound based on ability, no, I think Errol Spence is a better fighter. I think he's an unbelievable technical boxer, Errol Spence. But if you're talking about achievements, and that's how really pound for pound should be looked at in a way, the dominance compared to your peers, well, he's now undisputed in his weight division. Errol Spence has yet to achieve that. So I'm not trying to undermine him when I say he's not quite as good as Errol Spence at certain things, but I'm just trying to explain the reality of how I perceive it. But there's an element there of Errol Spence. The other guy that there's an element of, to me, is Deontay Wilder. Again, pound for pound, he's not as big of a hitter as Deontay Wilder. But there are other things he does that are better than Deontay Wilder. So again, pound for pound, he's a bigger puncher than Spence. He's almost like a marriage between the two, a bit of a mix and match. And so what would happen is, when he'd be backing off, he's lining you up. He's got that long jab, and he's lining you up with that right hand. And if he wants to throw a big right hand, he'll step in with that jab and follow that right hand down the pipe. And that's a typical sort of Deontay Wilder-esque type of combination. However, unlike Deontay Wilder, when he is on the back foot, he's actually better on the back foot than Wilder is. His balance is better. But when his balance does get a little bit messed up is when he throws a big power shot, or when he commits to punches, whether it's the jab or particularly the power punches, to be honest, the right hand, the left hook. His construct can wobble a little bit, and it takes a slight second to reset before he gets his feet below him. As a result of that, when he's committing to punches, that was the area in the first fight where Castano could capitalize on. On the other hand, however, Castano knew that he'd have to walk through hellfire and the big punching ability of Charlo in order to get close enough to do that. So you had these elements of sort of a Mexican standoff, as the phrase goes. There was a stalemate, and Castano would be edging his feet in close, and Charlo would be edging backwards, staying in that stance, half shift backwards. But what was happening is that Charlo was making an error. This is in the first fight, right? That Josh Kelly, I've been critical of him in the past making. Josh Kelly's got this great upper body movement, but he'll willingly move back. Even his feet are really good, but he'll willingly move back, and he'll get his back up on the ropes, and now he's stuck. and now he's got nowhere to go. And that's what was happening with Charlo. He was willingly moving back. Now his back's up against the ropes. Well, now Castano is going to go for hell for leather, and he's going to start throwing these big shots. Within that moment, you would see him land big shots on Charlo, and Charlo would instantly throw back. Left hooks, right hands, and Charlo's the heavier handed guy, even though Castano is the smoother combination puncher. And because in the first fight Charlo was very predictable with the 1-2, I felt he needed to drop in a 2-1 in there. You know, at times Castano would come in at an angle and he'd have a high guard in an angle where he's protecting himself from that right hand. So the jab was more of a weapon for Charlo, but he'd protect himself from that right hand. The jab would come in and then he's covered up. I wanted to see him land a big right hand on the guard first, break the guard, you know, engage the guard, then follow up with the left hand, go 2-1 instead of 1-2, vary in that manner. So he wasn't particularly creative in the first fight with the way he was throwing his punches, and he was too easy to track. But Castano, on the other hand, would come in and he would stay quite tall, and he would stay in the center line. He'd throw his combinations, and then he's not pivoting out to create a new angle. He's not coming in lower after he's throwing his first couple of shots so that if a counter shot comes, it whizzes over his head. He wasn't doing that. He just let go of combinations. So he's landing, Charlo's landing in return. Well, in the second fight, Charlo did exactly what he had to do, and that was essentially stay off the ropes. Now, this is easier said than done when you're being stalked, but what you have to do, there are various methods in which you can do this. What you have to essentially do is find unpredictable exit points to pivot out. In your mind, you create a circle within the ring, and you move around that circle rather than focusing on the ropes. You don't make the ring as big as it actually is. You make it smaller in your mind, and you can either punch your way out and pivot out. You can just pivot out without a punch, you know, throw a feint. You can come low and then shoot in with your shoulder, something Jack Cattrall had a lot of success with against Josh Taylor, to collapse that distance, to stop the guy from being able to work. So, because at range, Charlo had the reach advantage, he's the one punishing him. So when he comes close, if you then stop the fight from being able to occur by smothering, you're the one that's winning the fight at range, right? Even though he was tentative, he was still the one who was landing more at range, simply because Castano couldn't reach him. Well, in this second fight, he did start to circle the ring. He did start to drop feints, punches, drops of the shoulders to pivot out and things like that. And what you noticed is that Castano at range, he just couldn't get to him. He was too short. It was a mismatch. When he was getting up close, he was still having success. And then it became a real firefight, and they were landing big shots on each other. But this is the problem when you're having a shootout with a guy who's a bigger puncher than you. You either have to be able to hurt him badly, and Castano was landing flush shots, particularly with the lead right hand. In both fights, when he led with the right hand, he'd have a lot of success with it. But in the first fight, one of the things he did, when he was being chased by Charlo on the outside, he would take one step back and then come out at an angle. So Charlo couldn't run after him in a straight line. He was actually quite smart, Castano, in these exit points. He wasn't doing that in the second fight. But an even bigger deal than that, one of the biggest problems, to go back to the point I was about to make, when you're having a shootout with a guy who's a bigger puncher, you can't go for blow. You either have to hurt him and capitalize on that, or you have to outland him and make sure he's not landing on you. So while Charlo made the adjustment of being able to predominantly keep it off the ropes, when Castano was getting him up against the ropes and they were exchanging with each other, what you saw is that the level change wasn't happening. So he'd land a couple of big shots and he'd want to throw 3s and 4s, right? Because he's not having success on the outside. So he's not going to throw 1, 2 and then tie up. For him to outland him, he's got to really go to work on the inside. Cool, but then either change the angle or change the height dynamic, change the levels. He wasn't doing that. He'd throw 1, 2, head on the stick in the center line, still upright. Charlo, who's the taller man, would fall to the side, come back with hooks, he'd land in return. So you're landing big shots, he's landing on you, but he's a naturally bigger man and he's the bigger puncher. So how's that going to work out for you? Also, at points, Charlo's backup was when it was on the ropes and he was square on. You've landed 1 or 2 shots. I'm not saying you're going to be a clone of someone like Mike Tyson. And listen, this isn't one of those Mike Tyson stan channels. I'm not one of those guys who sits there and says, oh, prime Mike Tyson, nobody in history would have beaten Mike. That's not me. But he was a wonderful, explosive pressure fighter, and there's a lot you could learn from him. And one of the biggest things you could learn from Mike is when he had you up close, how he would change the angles on the inside. A little shift on the outside of your shoulder, and then all of a sudden, he's got his power shot in line with your center line. Now, that can allow an escape. Whether it's an uppercut though or a hook to the solar plexus, it can be very damaging because you're really twisting through and punching through the target. He should have done a lot more of that. Look to change the angle, slip outside the lead shoulder after your first couple of shots, take away his return shot and land something big as he's exiting. He wasn't doing that. He was standing right in front of him. He was eating big shots. And once he got hurt, to be honest with you, Charlo's a very good finisher, and the referee shouldn't have let it carry on when he did let it carry on, by the way. I thought that was terrible from the ref. You could have seen him seriously hurt. He was staggering all over the place. The ref gave him way too much of a benefit of the doubt. Congratulations to Charlo. Brilliant fight. Brilliant performance. I love the adjustment he was able to make. The Tszyu fight, Tim Tszyu, would be a brilliant fight. He's been talking potentially about going up to middleweight and unifying. There's been a lot of talk about him fighting Gennady Golovkin. Listen, I think Charlo's brilliant, no doubt about it. And one of the things I love about Charlo, by the way, is unlike a lot of American fighters, and this is not me picking on American fighters per se, but probably more the promoters. And I'm going to get to that in a second, by the way. Jermell has been willing to fight everybody, so I've got massive respect for him. He's a guy that wants all that smoke, and you've got to congratulate him on that. You look at Oscar De La Hoya's tweet, for instance. He put out not a tweet, he gave an interview whereby he said that if he was in charge of Canelo's career, he never would have let Dimitri Bivol fight Canelo Alvarez, and he sort of tried to imply that Eddie Hearn took him down the path of a defeat. First and foremost, Oscar, I don't think Eddie can tell Canelo what to do. Canelo felt, listen, I'm very popular with the judges, I've got them behind me, I'm willing to pursue this, I believe I can overthrow Dimitri Bivol. Eddie Hearn was never going to say to him, I don't want you taking this fight, and Canelo's going to listen. That's first and foremost. Secondly, think about the message that you're sending out there. This guy is, as the phrase goes these days in boxing, daring to be great, right? He wants to go and unify the light heavyweight division, and you were going to stop him because it was too big of a risk. And this is the problem we have in American boxing at the moment. You have too many guys who are highly talented, wonderful fighters. They're not fighting anybody, and their fan base may have an agenda, they may be very loyal, whatever it might be. They buy into the idea that these guys are on a pound for pound list. Take Tank Davis as an example. Superb fighter. Nobody can undermine the abilities of Gervonta Davis. But actually look at his CV. What is his best ever win? Pedraza? Right? Tank should have been in there with much better fighters than he's been in with. And this is the problem. This thing happens consistently with the fighters. They won't necessarily, in the United States, they won't take the big risks, but they want all the plaudits. And when they don't get the plaudits or someone's critical, they're accused of being haters. You can't have that. Whereas Jermell's really wanting that smoke with everybody. So congratulations to him. Having said that, going back to Gennady Golovkin, he does get hit way too much. And Gennady Golovkin might have shown some signs of decline, particularly with what he's capable of absorbing. He didn't look particularly comfortable in his last fight, taking it to the body. But Murata is a bigger man than Charlo. He's a heavy-handed guy too. Charlo isn't the most explosive body puncher, in my humble opinion, who's going to be able to, he's not in there with Canelo. And offensively speaking, Golovkin can still crack. I mean, we've seen that in his last fight. I don't think it's a good fight for Charlo. But if he takes it, I'd love to see the fight. I'd tip my hat off to him. I'd tip my hat to him again for being willing to take these big risks. This is what we want to see from these top fighters, particularly in the United States, and not to hear the sort of narrative that Oscar De La Hoya is talking about, or the sort of manufacturing the path of a top fighter like Gervonta Davis to ensure that they don't take risks. Let me know what you think about that. Now let's quickly talk about Tony Yoka and Martin Bakole. Martin Bakole is very smooth with his punching, for a guy who at times you look at him and it's not a guy that you will instantly assume is a slick guy, right? But he is actually, he's deceptively rangy, and he puts his hands together really well. He's a very confident fighter. At times he looks a little bit wild, and when he throws that right hand, he'll lean over that lead front foot. He makes a lot of what you would call errors, but he's fluid with the movement. There's a variation in his hand movement. That's what I'm saying. There's a fluidity with the way he puts his punches together. He's capable of a variety of different types of shots, and he's heavy-handed, it seems, with all of them. He's willing to be patient. He's confident. He's willing to land short, little, almost like slapping shots that seem to have an effect. So there's a lot to enjoy about Martin Bakole. He's a fighter that I really like to watch. Now, unlike Michael Hunter, Tony Yoka does not exit the pocket with any real sort of fluidity or any real upper body movement. You saw a lot of agility with Michael Hunter when he was up against Bakole. He would come very low to exit the pocket and things like that, so it made him a hard target to hit. Very quick on getting inside, landing those shots, able to then stay inside, forehead on the chest if he had to, and just work the body, putting himself in safe positions. Yoka isn't like that. He's much taller, he's more cumbersome. So I knew that Bakole would find him an easier target to find. Now if he was to find him, would Yoka be able to ensure that he's able to get out quickly and maintain range? Well, one of the worrying aspects of Tony Yoka's game that I noticed against Christian Hammer is that when you engage him, he has this terrible habit whereby he covers up and dips forward. This isn't a guy who's comfortable under pressure. When people many years ago used to say that David Price would be the heavyweight to take over boxing, one of the reasons I was never sold on that idea is because as monstrous as a puncher as he was and offensively really devastating, there were moments where he was up against the ropes. When he'd get hit, he'd cover up and lean back on the ropes. Now, one of the problems with leaning your heels, your weight onto your heels, and you're just covered up like that, is that you've essentially made yourself a sitting duck. There's nowhere to escape to. Now, if you back up onto the ropes, if you are going to get back onto the ropes and your weight shifted onto your front foot, from there, you've got a variety of options. If I'm sort of bent forward, weight onto my front foot, I can pull back. So you throw a punch, I can pull back. There's still somewhere for me to go. I can pivot out. I can land a shot and pivot out, right? Like I said before, I can come low and underneath the shot and then come into you. Whereas if I'm leaning back on the ropes, after that first shot where I've fallen back, you could come right on my chest and I'm leant back on the ropes. You've literally got one arm holding me down and then you're following out with power shots. There's nowhere for me to go. Well, by the same token, if I'm covering up and just ducking forward in the center of the ring, well, now I'm a punching bag. And Yoka seems to have that problem, even with Christian Hammer, who showed no ambition whatsoever. He just covered up, leant forward, and he was just willing to take these shots. And Hammer wouldn't follow up on it. Well, Martin Bakole is not Hammer. Martin Bakole is heavy-handed, like I said. He's more fluid with these combinations. And he is willing to come to win. He is looking to come to win. And he's got that rangy jab. So once you've covered up and then you're trying to pull out, he'll even catch you on the way out. So against Martin Bakole, I knew he would have areas that were a bit scary for him. However, I also felt that Martin Bakole sometimes plods forward a little bit. He's a bit of a plodder with his feet. I saw somebody put out a joke on Twitter that really made me laugh that said Martin Bakole is slower than a week in jail. Right? And that was funny. But because he's decent, really good on sort of inner mid-range, and he's fluid with things like that, he's got these heavy hands. If you're not going to be in and out quickly enough to maintain that range, it could cause you a problem. I thought Yoka would be able to do that. A decorated amateur fighter, former Olympic gold medalist. He wasn't able to do that consistently. He wasn't. He was too easy to find. And if you are too easy to find against a guy like Bakole, you're going to have some problems. So basically, it was a very... It was the worst of Tony Yoka. And I don't mean that to undermine Martin Bakole. What I meant is that he exposed the worst of Tony Yoka. This was Bakole's doing, right? It wasn't a case of Yoka just underestimated him. It was a well-earned victory. And congratulations to Martin Bakole and Billy Nelson, who's always screamed from the rooftops about how much he believes in Bakole. This now earns a shot for me for a big fight for Bakole. Tony Yoka wasn't in the top 10, wasn't in the top 15 really based on what he's achieved in his pro career, but he is a decorated Olympian and he was considered a massive prospect. So what I would like to see now for Martin Bakole is to get a fight against a guy who is in the top 10 or 15. If Dillian White's going to carry on, that would be a great fight. Derek Chisora is another one that would be a really exciting fight. I'm sure Billy Nelson would love those fights. There was talk of the Hrgovic fight. Who's to say that Bakole doesn't deserve a fight like that now? So yeah, he's earned himself a shot at the big stage now, and you have to give him a lot of credit. Well done to Bakole, well done to Billy Nelson, who's done a terrific job with him, like I said. And let me know what you think about where you want them to go from here. In terms of Boots Ennis, I really should touch upon him quickly. Very dominant performance. He looks sensational, doesn't he? Clayton was a bit of a punching bag, though. He didn't want to throw anything back. He was hugely intimidated. We will get to that in another video in terms of a breakdown and things like that, or talk of Boots like a prospect in a sense. We know that he's not now. That was an eliminator, but we'll discuss his future, so to speak, in another video. Let me know about everything that we've spoken about in this video, your views. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. Chat to you soon. God bless, and hit that like button, subscribe button, and notifications button.